Do you ever feel like the world is just too much and you want to check out of everything like politics and life and adulting? Well, today on Young Heretics, I am taking you on a vacation, courtesy of our old pal, William Shakespeare. We are on a quest on this show to do every Shakespeare play, one episode on every Shakespeare play. We're cycling through the three kinds as enumerated in the first folio, and those are tragedies, histories, and comedies. So the last one that we did was a tragedy, and that was Romeo and Juliet. Now we're going to move on to a comedy, one of Shakespeare's most beloved comedies called As You Like It. It is a great play, a beautiful play with lots of famous speeches. The All the World's a Stage speech is in this play, which we're going to talk about. It's also kind of a funny play because almost nothing happens in it. And that's part of the point. It's part of a genre called pastoral, which is famously about getting away from society as a way of understanding society better and thinking about society. It's kind of like a little break from reality. It takes place in the Forest of Arden, or most of it takes place in the Forest of Arden, which was both the name of a real forest in Shakespeare's home county of Warwickshire. It was his mother's maiden name, so it was a sort of part of his childhood and his past, but it's also the Forest of Arden is also the name of a forest in France. So it's this kind of dual reality where we're in real life, and we also have this kind of shadow other world that we're escaping to. Pastoral is as old as the Hellenistic period. Theocritus and then later Virgil would kind of invent this genre, and it's a genre in which idyllic shepherds, right, the shepherds of the fields kind of live in this pre-lapsarian Eden. And one of the things that it helps us to think about is what it has now become a big buzzword, and that is social roles, right? Society, social constructs, the expectations that we have, and the ways that we feel constrained even by good rules, even by societies that generally work. We all still sometimes feel like, I, the great individual, must escape. The heart wants what it wants, right? Romeo and Juliet was kind of about this too. These two people fall in love, and that, even though it's foolish and crazy, it also kind of cuts across all of the generational nonsense that their families and their parents are at each other's throats over. This play comes from, I think it's a more fully realized and complex play than Romeo and Juliet. It comes from around 1599, early 1600s, not totally sure, but it was a period of enormous fertility in Shakespeare's life. He was just kind of at the top of his game. He wrote Henry V around this time. He wrote Hamlet. He wrote Julius Caesar. There were all sorts of plays that were really kind of, famous, and some of his best came around this time. And As You Like It is one of them. It's one of the greats. The whole thing comes out of, like I said, this tradition of pastoral. It's got a direct source in a little novella called Rosalind. It was by Thomas Lodge, who was himself kind of at odds with his family and with society. His parents kind of wanted him to be something other than an artist. And so he himself was concerned, especially in his will, with his inheritance. And that's part of what this play is about. It's about the law of primogeniture, whereby, according to English tradition and law and custom, the firstborn son gets the whole inheritance, and the others have to kind of fend for themselves or beg for some assistance from their older brother and all of that. So that's what it's about. Thomas Lodge's novella rather, is called Rosalind. Even further back behind that, there's this poem called The Tale of Gamelin, which is 1350 or so, and that's part of we talked about the Matière de Bretagne, the matter of Britain, which was like this vast store of British narrative poetry. So we have this sort of immediate British history, English tradition stretching back several hundred years. But then we have, even further back, this long tradition of getting away from society in order to think about society, going out into the forest, into the woods, among the shepherds, playing your pipes, watching the goats frolic and leap about, and using this as a way to kind of hold a mirror up to cultured and civilized life. We today, right, often have this fantasy, and it doesn't quite come in the same form, but you'll hear, for example, some of the more kind of online right-wingers will say, like, I just want to go live in a commune and get away from our desiccated, crumbling society, right? I want to grow my own food and have a homestead, right? And these are all good things, but they're also part of the pastoral fantasy. They're part of a way of imagining a kind of life that you can compare with real life, civilized life, right? Life in this broken down society that you're living in. And you kind of hold that up and compare it, and you dream of getting away from it all as a way of commenting on how bad things currently are. And this is true on the left too, not just on the right, right? You have the kind of crunchy granola fantasy, right? Of like a future, an eco future where we'll all kind of compost and live off the land, right? Pastoral fantasy is just a natural human impulse. And it especially comes up when we feel like things are kind of falling apart in the rules of our society. Things were not quite so bad in Elizabethan England, I don't think, but there was a lot of stuff that Shakespeare would probably not have been super thrilled about. There had been, in 1599, there was what's called the Bishop's Ban, because it was sponsored by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London, this kind of effort to silence certain forms of satire because it was thought to be politically dangerous. And there's a line in this play, and As You Like It, that kind of criticizes that, which we could think a lot about today. The line is, since the little wit that fools have was silenced, the little foolery that wise men have makes a great show. When you start axing people off of Twitter just for making dumb jokes, or for, because it's politically dangerous to make jokes about Dr. Fauci or to make jokes about whoever, right? Then you just have rule by fools, right? And so that's one kind of thing that Shakespeare is trying to get away from, trying to circumvent with this play. He kind of picks up some of the themes of the kinds of satire that have been banned under the Bishop's Ban and puts it into this play. There's all sorts of stuff in here, as I said, about inheritance, right? About, is it really right that just by an accident of birth you should have to fill this role of being, the son of the scion of the family, or you should be disinherited just because you're a second or third son, right? And so that's the crux of the play. But along the way, we have all the classic comedy stuff. We have crazy marriages, we have mistaken identities, we have cross-dressing, we have a fool, we have a wise fool and foolish wise men and kings and all that. So it's a fun play. It's got a lot of beautiful stuff, a lot of great speeches in it. Let's get started. You guys, I continue to love everything that Public Goods makes. I've just decked out my kitchen, especially with their snacks and their soap. The dish soap is actually really nice. It looks really good in basically any kitchen, a very sleek, modern design. And you can guarantee that anything you get there is going to be super clean, just made simply with none of the crazy additives or weird chemicals that you get in some grocery store-bought products. I'm constantly snacking on their, chocolate-covered almonds and just really great snacks that they have. But also for my cat, they have this treat called freeze-dried duck nibs, which is both great to say, and also Chad Cat loves them. Public Goods has top quality products, and we've worked out this incredible deal with them, where if you go to publicgoods.com/heretics or use the code heretics at checkout, you will get $15 off your first Public Goods order with no minimum purchase. That is really sick. That means that you can just get $15 of stuff for free, basically. There's no minimum purchase. Publicgoods.com/heretics or use the code heretics at checkout. That's publicgoods.com/heretics to get $15 worth of free stuff, $15 off your first order at Public Goods with no minimum purchase. Check it out. So I said that not that much happens, and what I mean by that is that the play itself is involved in a lot of kind of speeches, and there's a lot of sort of confusion that goes on, but basically we know that the two main characters are going to get married because it's a comedy. But there are kind of a lot of different little events, even though they're not super important. So I'm just going to mention them and talk about them as I start reading through this play. The major kind of inciting event, I guess, is the death of this fellow Roland de Boyce. And this is one thing that de Bois, right, of the Wood, suggests that maybe we are going back to Thomas Lodge's Rosalind in France, right, in Ardennes, this kind of foreign place. And he has three sons. He has Orlando, Jakes or Jaques. This is, you would spell it Jacques, like the French name, but it's pronounced in the play as Jakes or Jaques. And then Oliver. And Oliver's the oldest son. He's also kind of a dick. He's basically left Orlando, whom we sympathize with. He's our hero. He's left Orlando, hasn't even let Orlando go to school, keeps him, Orlando says, like a beast, right? Just keeps him kind of chained up. And he's a red-blooded young guy. He's got this kind of pent-up energy from being dispossessed. And this is a force, an eternal force of nature that we have talked about before on the show. We talked about it with, the army in Rome when the Republic fell, that if you just leave young men without any endeavor, without anything to do, that any fields to till or land to conquer, they get restless. And this is what happens. So we begin, lights up on Orlando, who has this to say to his older brother, Oliver. I'm reading here, as always, from the Folger Shakespeare Libraries editions. They've got facing page notes. Love these editions, and they were kind enough to send me a whole set of them, which is awesome. So here comes the confrontation between Orlando and his older brother, Oliver. Orlando says, come, elder brother, you are too young in this. This is a play with a lot of back and forth and wordplay, right? You are too young, older brother. And he must therefore put his hands on him because Oliver says, wilt thou lay hands on me, villain? Orlando, I am no villain. I am the youngest son of Sir Roland de Boyce. He was my father, and he is thrice a villain that says such a father begot villains. Wert thou not my brother, I would not take this hand from thy throat till this other had pulled out thy tongue for saying so. Thou hast railed on thyself. Adam, who's Oliver's servant, says, sweet masters, be patient. For your father's remembrance be at accord. Oliver says, let me go to Orlando. Orlando, I will not till I please. You shall hear me. My father charged you in his will to give me good education. You have trained me like a peasant, obscuring and hiding from me all gentlemanlike qualities. The spirit of my father grows strong in me, and I will no longer endure it. Therefore, allow me such exercises as may become a gentleman, or give me the poor a lottery my father left me by testament. With that I will go by my fortunes. Oliver, and what wilt thou do? Beg when that is spent? Well, sir, get you in. I will not long be troubled with you. You shall have some part of your will. I pray you leave me. So this tells you what the relationship between these two guys is like. The fact of the inheritance plus the kind of stinginess of the brother has created this terrible rift, right? And Shakespeare is off the bat saying, we have this law, we have this way of doing things, and it does create order, right? You know where the wealth is going. You're not having just a free-for-all of people fighting over it, but in fact, it also creates this, these terrible losses. And all social roles and rules do this. We know this, right? Even good rules and rules, human beings are infinitely complex. There are infinitely many exceptions, and people abuse their power, as Oliver is doing here, right? And so Shakespeare is both saying, this is, there's no framework or basis on which to live if you don't have some rules for society, but also every rule creates these terrible disasters. And this is something that, our modern radicals exploit by saying, like, look at this one person out of a million, right, who isn't served by our way of doing things. Look at this, one poor transgender kid that can't go into the bathroom that he wants to go into, and so now we have to upend everything for everybody, right? That's not the answer. But also we recognize, right, that rules, although even when they're there for a reason, right, cause this chafing and these problems, especially because people are imperfect and they abuse them. This is especially true at the highest level of this society between Duke Frederick and Duke Senior. So the other kind of major premise of this plot is that Duke Frederick, who's the younger brother, has ousted Duke Senior. There's been a kind of coup, and Duke Senior, the older, Duke Senior means older, right? Duke Senior now lives in the woods, the Forest of Arden, and he has created in the woods this kind of shadow court, this kind of pastoral court that they're going to eventually get into in a bit. But first, there is this sort of, classic inciting incident. Orlando is so pent up, so angry, so frustrated that he challenges the court wrestler, Charles, to a fight. He wrestles with the court wrestler. Oliver conspires with Charles to try to maim or kill him, but Orlando wins, right? This is very sexy. And it turns out that in attendance at this big wrestling match, the daughter of the old ousted Duke is watching. Rosalind, the female lead of this play, is the daughter of Duke Senior, who's been exiled. But Rosalind for now gets to stay in the court, and she's absolute besties, completely tight with Celia, who is her cousin, the daughter of Duke Frederick. Over and over again, it's said in the play that they have this deep, deep family commitment, these ties of blood and affection and love. And Rosalind and Celia are watching as Orlando beats this champion wrestler, which of course is super hot, and Rosalind falls immediately in love. This is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for the whole play. But one of the issues is that Duke Frederick, has a kind of enmity. We can't quite tell what sort of enmity with Oliver's dead father, Roland de Bois. So here's what Duke Frederick says. He's very impressed with this wrestling match, as everybody is. And he says to Oliver, who's your father? And he says, Orlando, I am Orlando, my liege, the youngest son of Sir Roland de Bois. Duke Frederick, I would thou hadst been son to some man else. The world esteemed thy father honorable, but I did find him still mine enemy. Thou shouldst have better pleased me with this deed had thou descended from another house. But fare thee well. Thou art a gallant youth. I would thou hadst told me of another father. So this gives you a sense for Duke Frederick. He's this kind of capricious, he's later called humorous, which means he's like in his humors all the time. He develops these paranoias, these suspicions. Even though everybody loved Roland de Bois, Duke Frederick, not so much. And so this is causing a problem. Celia says to Rosalind, were I my father, cuz, would I do this? Celia here, right, concerned that the sins of the father are the sins of the daughter, essentially. She has this terrible family allegiance to somebody who is arrayed against the people that she loves. Orlando, I am more proud to be Sir Roland's son, his youngest son, and would not change that calling to be adopted heir to Frederick. Rosalind says to Celia, my father loved Sir Roland as his soul, and all the world was of my father's mind. Had I before known this young man his son, I should have given him tears unto entreaties ere he should thus have ventured. Celia, gentle cousin, let us go thank him and encourage him. My father's rough and envious disposition sticks me at heart. Sir, you have well deserved. If you do keep your promises in love, but justly, as you have exceeded all promise, your mistress shall be happy. Rosalind gives Orlando a chain from her neck. She says, gentlemen, wear this for me, one out of suits with fortune, that could give more, but that her hand lacks means. Shall we go, cuz? Celia, aye. Fare you well, gentlemen. Orlando, in an aside, right, talking to us, can I not say, I thank you? My better parts are all thrown down, and that which here stands up is but a quintain, a mere lifeless block. Rosalind says to Celia, he calls us back. My pride fell with my fortunes. I'll ask him what he would. Did you call, sir? Sir, you have wrestled well and overthrown more than your enemy. So this is a kind of an analogous situation to Romeo and Juliet, right? You have these two people immediately passionately in love, maybe foolishly, maybe not, but that's the reality. That's, the heart wants what it wants. They are in love. And there is this sort of encrusted social structure around them that is going to cause trouble. Frederick has this weird caprice that he doesn't like Roland de Bois. He's also, got this sort of paranoia from having usurped his brother. And we know also that there's somewhere out there, there's a better way, right? Duke Senior loves noble men. And Orlando is incredibly admirable for sticking up for his father, right? Even under threat of death. And so we have, again, set up this tension between the kind of messy, sinful, fallen world of real society and the natural outpouring of love and affection and desire that is coming out of these young people. So that's the setup. In comes Lebeau, who is here basically to give a message to Orlando. He says, good sir, I do in friendship counsel you to leave this place, albeit you have deserved high commendation, true applause and love, yet such is now the Duke's condition that he miscounters all that you have done. The Duke is humorous, not funny, but just capricious, right? What he is indeed more suits you to conceive than I to speak of. Orlando, I thank you, sir, and pray you tell me this. Which of the two was daughter of the Duke that here was at the wrestling? Lebeau, neither his daughter, if we judge by manners, but yet indeed the smaller is his daughter. The other is daughter to the banished Duke, and here detained by her usurping uncle, to keep his daughter company, whose loves are dearer than the natural bond of sisters. But I can tell you that of late this Duke hath taken displeasure against his gentle niece, grounded upon no other argument, but that the people praise her for her virtue. So this jealousy, right? Rosalind is beloved and beautiful. This is also going to cause problems for her. Orlando is the son of the wrong guy, and he's just won this big fight, right? Problems for him too. but that the people praise her for her virtues and pity her for her good father's sake, and on my life, his malice against the lady will suddenly break forth. Sir, fare you well. Hereafter, in a better world than this, I shall desire more love and knowledge of you. In a better world than this, right? That's the kind of key of what's about to happen, right? That we're going to enter into this alternative universe where man is not fallen and love binds all together. But I love this line, what he is indeed more suits you to conceive than I to speak of. It reminds me, we had in the Agamemnon Aeschylus play, that introduction where he says, I can't, I'm leaving you to guess what I can't say because I'm under this dark power. And so it turns out the Duke is humorous indeed. Rosalind enters and says, she is banished. She's been banished. She's been kicked out. Just at the same time as Oliver has been warned to run. Why has this happened? Thou art thy father's daughter, there's enough, right? That's all that's happened is just that she is, this kind of undesirable element. This happens in courts, that usurp older powers all the time. You have to get rid of your old enemies, get rid of the old regime. In some sense, Frederick is doing exactly what Machiavelli might advise him to do in his circumstance. But for our heroes, it's a great tragedy. Celia, touchingly, is going to come along. It's very beautiful, what she says. We're now on to Act 1, Scene 3. And Celia says, O my poor Rosalind, whither wilt thou go? Wilt thou change fathers? I will give thee mine. I charge thee, be not thou more grieved than I am. Rosalind, I have more cause. Celia, thou hast not, cousin. Prithee be cheerful. Knowst thou not the Duke hath banished me, his daughter? Rosalind, that he hath not. Celia, no, hath not. Rosalind lacks then the love which teacheth thee that thou and I am one. Shall we be sundered? Shall we part, sweet girl? No, let my father seek another heir. Therefore devise with me how we may fly, whither to go, and what to bear with us. And do not seek to take your change upon you, to bear your griefs yourself, and leave me out. For by this heaven now at our sorrows pale, say what thou canst. I'll go along with thee. It's one of the loveliest and tenderest relationships, I think, in Shakespeare's comedies, this love between Rosalind and Celia. And note always these kind of lovely double meanings, right? I'll give you my father, meaning both, if I could, I would put you under the protection of my father, but also I wish my father wasn't my father, right? This capricious, evil Duke, right? That I wish that I could just, pawn him off on you. So, lovely, delicate interactions. And now the jig is up, right? Off they go into the forest, Orlando and Celia and Rosalind. In order to protect themselves, Celia and Rosalind disguise themselves. Rosalind dresses up as a man, as Ganymede, and Celia becomes Aliena, who is this shepherdess and the sister of Ganymede. And so here we are in the setup, which is this kind of pastoral setup, classic cross-dressing situation, which will come to play in a little bit. But let me just make a note first about this whole idea of pastoral and its history, because it's kind of cool where it comes from. Guys, you need to get your skincare game on point, and you need to check out Disco to do that. Whenever you start talking about skincare, guys are like, oh, I don't know, I think that's just for chicks or whatever. But it's not. You should look good if you want to get a date, if you want to get a job, if you don't just move about in the world. You should care about how your face looks. And Disco is the place to go for products designed specifically for men, specifically to deal with the stuff that guys have to deal with: bags under your eyes, dry skin, razor burn. Disco has this stick that you roll on, this sort of facial scrub, which is super helpful and just clears the acne right up. So I really recommend that, but basically anything that they make, top shelf stuff. It's letsdisco.com and enter the promo code Heretics when you go there, and you'll get 30% off your first order. That's letsdisco.com, enter the code Heretics at checkout, and you'll get 30% off. That's a huge discount to start taking better care of yourself and your face, especially as you get older. But even if you're just, young and trying to make your way in the world, you ought to care about how you look. You ought to care about skincare. And there are tons of great kits on there if you don't know where to start. Letsdisco.com, enter Heretics at checkout for 30% off their incredible skincare products. It's a great offer. Thank you, Disco, for sponsoring Young Heretics. So like I said, the idea that, the yearning to go out into the countryside and seek what in Latin is called otium, right? This this leisure, this kind of being at ease, and to get away from the city and the hustle and bustle and the, all the natural shocks that flesh is heir to, and just, the way in which the civilization and its discontents, right? The way in which just being alive in this supremely stupid world can get you down sometimes. This longing is as old as time itself. But the great originator, really, of putting that longing into poetry is a poet named Theocritus, 3rd century BC, Hellenistic era. We've talked about this before. And he wrote what were called eidilia. This is a diminutive, meaning, you take a Greek word and then you add the ilion ending and it makes it little. So it's literally a little picture or a little type, a little genre. And so Theocritus did not only write pastoral poetry. He wrote all sorts of little exchanges between shepherds and, contests and singing competitions between shepherds. So there's lots of pastoral in Theocritus. But there's also scenes of city life. There's scenes of the court of Ptolemy's court in Egypt. There's just, it's just kind of little pictures of life. And that's what eidilion initially means. But of course, it comes into English as our word idyll. And this is where we get idyllic, right? Because what's most remembered from Theocritus is this ideal pastoral landscape. And so the idyll, the pastoral idyll, right, is this little picture of a perfect world, a world before Adam fell. And this is mostly passed on through Virgil, whom we've met before, right? Augustan era poet at the onset of the Roman Empire, who would therefore have good reason to kind of yearn for some simpler time, Rome's pastoral past, right? Remember that Romans thought of themselves as farmer stock, having worked the land. And so in the eclogues, Virgil sort of recreates and carries forward this Theocritean idea that somewhere out there are shepherds who, even though they don't have worldly trappings and wealth, they have kind of homespun wisdom. So that idea of longing kind of comes out of all the many things that Theocritus wrote about. This was the one that really captured Virgil's soul. He brought it forward in the form of the Georgics. Now in Elizabethan England, as we talked about, it has been revived. Edmund Spencer has pastoral poetry. There's just a whole genre of it that's coming back in the Renaissance, because the Renaissance, in part, is about recapturing the ideas and the longings of the ancient world. Virgil himself, and Theocritus as well, is not purely just a kind of fantasist about how ideal things are, right? And especially, he writes the Georgics, but he also writes the eclogues, and especially in the Georgics, he's much less sanguine about everything than like we would think of when we think of the idealized pastoral. And indeed, that's part of the point, right? Part of the point is not just to get away from it all, but by getting away from it all, to kind of comment on just how far man has fallen. It's kind of a precursor to the Romantic movement, right? That we talked about Wordsworth and Keats and all these guys that wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of city life, the kind of dark satanic mills, as Blake wrote. We'll be talking more about that with my father, no relation, Andrew Klavan, shortly. But in any case, right, that's the tradition that we are sitting in now squarely as we make our way out into the Forest of Arden. As I said, in the Forest of Arden, there is a kind of shadow court run over by the exiled Duke Senior, and his men. And it turns out that they're having a grand old time. In fact, they kind of like it better. It was, the Duke Senior says, it was sort of worse out there. And now we do not suffer Adam's punishment. We have this ideal life, and we can live as we please in a kind of rustic form of court life. And in this court, we meet the other Jaques, the famous Jaques. I mentioned that Orlando has a brother named Jaques. It's kind of confusing that there's a second Jaques or Jaques, but this is the famous one. This is the guy who says all the world's a stage, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, let's just read the kind of introduction of Jaques and the court and Orlando's entry into this world. This is Act 2, Scene 7. Jaques comes in. Duke Senior, why, how now, monsieur? What a life is this, that your poor friends must woo your company? What, you look merrily. Jaques, a fool, I met a fool at Forest. Rosalind and Celia have brought with them their fool Touchstone, who is the classic wise fool of comedy. Jaques and Touchstone will develop this long-standing relationship throughout the play. So even though he kind of technically belongs to Celia, he really goes with Jaques, the sort of wise fool and the miserable wise man, because we'll find out that what you look merrily, that's usually played as a joke, because Jaques is classic melancholic, right? He's sort of he's like Eeyore. He's kind of depressing, he's kind of a downer. So Jaques is a fool. I met a fool of the forest, a motley fool, a miserable world. As I do live by food, I met a fool who laid him down and basked him in the sun and railed on Lady Fortune in good terms. In good set terms, and yet a motley fool. Good morrow, fool, quoth I. No, sir, quoth he, call me not fool, till heaven hath sent me fortune. And then he drew a dial from his poke, and, looking on it with lackluster eye, says very wisely, it is 10 o'clock. Thus we may see, quoth he, how the world wags. 'Tis but an hour ago since it was 9, and after 1 hour more 'twill be 11. And so from hour to hour we ripe and ripe, and then from hour to hour we rot, and thereby hangs a tale. When I did hear the motley fool thus moral on the time, my lungs began to crow like chanticleer, that fools should be so deep contemplative, and I did laugh sans intermission, an hour by his dial. O noble fool, O worthy fool, motley's the only wear. So, kind of a classic theme, but one that is exploited to great effect by Shakespeare here, that the people in power are the worst kinds of people, and the people on the outskirts, the exiles, the fools, right, have the real wisdom. This is, again, perhaps a kind of dig at the bishop's ban, right, that when you shut fools up, then all you have is the foolishness of supposedly wise men. We talked about that last week with Socrates. But also you have this classic theme in some of the most famous lines in Shakespeare, right? Thereby hangs a tale. Too much of a good thing. Have you ever said that? You owe it to Shakespeare. And of course, the famous all the world's a stage speech. And this idea that, we are basically under the weight of time, that even when we run away to the forest, we can't actually escape these fallen realities of our world, or if we do, we have to basically exile ourselves from society. It's kind of this tragic view in the middle of this comedy, which is what makes it so great, which is why Jaques is this kind of melancholic character in the middle of the comedy. But before we get to All the World is Stage, let's just bring Orlando into the picture, because he ends up walking in on this other court, and he basically threatens them. He comes in with sword drawn and says, I almost die for food, and let me have it. Duke Senior says, sit down and feed, and welcome to our table. Orlando, speak you so gently? Pardon me, I pray you. I thought that all things had been savage here, and therefore put I on the countenance of stern commandment. But whate'er you are, that in this desert inaccessible under the shade of melancholy boughs lose and neglect the creeping hours of time, if ever you have looked on better days, if ever been where bells have knolled to church, if ever sat at any good man's feast, if ever from your eyelids wiped a tear and know what 'tis to pity and be pitied, let gentleness my strong enforcement be, in the which hope I blush and hide my sword. And Duke Senior says, true it is that we have seen better days, and have with holy bell been knolled to church, and sat at good men's feasts, and wiped our eyes, and of drops that sacred pity hath engendered. And therefore sit you down in gentleness, and take upon command what help we have, that to your wanting may be minister. He's saying we are civilized. We live in this rustic setting, but we, in fact, are creatures of civilization. And basically what we've done here is we've tried to strip civilization of all its pretense and all of its evil and its brokenness. And so Orlando, who comes in basically thinking that he's in this Hobbesian jungle, right? That, you just kind of get what you can. Nasty life is nasty, poor, brutish, and short. He learns that, in fact, nature has more to teach the civilized man than the civilized man has to teach by constraining nature. It is in this context that we should understand this famous speech, right? Because people quote it all the time. And indeed, there are scholars, Emma Smith of Oxford makes this point really well, that, if you think about these plays in their Elizabethan context, you realize that people were keeping what was called commonplace books, right? And so this thing that we do now, where we take quotes out of Shakespeare and just place them with no context. That's really actually not all that anachronistic. That's pretty much what people were doing then. They were sort of pulling these quotes, these moral lessons, these pieces of wisdom, and writing them down in books. This, by the way, is still an excellent practice. It's not as much in fashion as it was in the Elizabethan era, but if you keep, I have one on my notes app, if you just keep a little book where you just write down stuff, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have like a vast sum of knowledge about where it comes from, but things that really strike you are good to keep handy, because you'd be surprised otherwise how much you forget them. Anyway, all of that having been said, right, all the world's a stage, hugely quotable speech, right? You can pick it up and recite it. You can use it in a million different contexts. And of course, it has this wonderful irony that people, the person reciting it is playing a role, just like the person dressing up as a man is actually a man dressing up as a woman. So there's all this kind of, wry, self-aware stuff in it. But it also comes within the course of a play, and it's not just a set piece, it's actually about something. So let's read it, and then I'm going to talk about what it has to say for us about this whole question of social roles. So it's introduced here by Duke Senior, who is again saying, we're actually civilized, right? Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy. The wide and universal theater presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play in. And then on goes Jaques. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school, and then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad, made to his mistress' eyebrow, then a soldier, full of strange oaths, and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. The bubble reputation, right? The reputation that vanishes in an instant. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances, and so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well shaved a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice, turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all, that ends this strange, eventful history, is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Sans is a kind of English usage of the French word sans, which means without. So there's another little note here that we may be in France, right, in the Forest of Arden. But note the genius of this. It's got like a million different levels. So as I mentioned, right, obviously this is an actor on a stage saying that the world is a stage. And we have just been talking about the characters in this play trying to escape or fight against or chafe against their social roles. And Jaques is basically saying, you're a human being, but you can't escape these roles. They're built into what you are. Part of what you are is to kind of go through these stages and to live into these kind of archetypes. And we resist this so strongly because we're this hyper-individualist culture, and we basically only recognize one half of the truth that Shakespeare is saying here. Shakespeare is admitting it's true, right? That as individuals, we, fall in love with whoever we fall in love with, and, we might rebel against the way that society has apportioned wealth, and all of these things might be unfair, and they might be abused. And yet, right, what we want to say when that happens is, so we should tear down all the walls, tear down all the roles, right? And just escape into the forest and be free forever. And what Jaques reminds you of is that actually it can't help living into certain archetypes. And what we ought to be doing is trying to refine and perfect the archetypes by informing them with our humanity, rather than trying to just tear down the archetypes altogether, abolish marriage, like abolish gender, all this stuff, because it's so constraining and human beings should just be free. But of course, that kind of freedom where there are no guide rails, no traditions, no signposts is paralyzing. It means that you have no baseline against which to make your choices. And you also will end up just trapped in the same roles as before, but with less wisdom about it because you've rejected all the old ways of thinking about it. Jaques is basically saying there's nowhere to run from the fact that you are not just a free, autonomous individual, but also folded into the fabric of human life with relationships and with a role to play. You're not just you, you're also a son or a mother or a sister, right? And those relationships put certain responsibilities on you, which can be very painful, especially when people fall short, right? I know well, luckily I have wonderful parents myself, but I know well what it is like to grow up with parents that you don't get along with, or that, have fallen short of what they should be. And I know that a lot of you out there have reached out to me about this, right? That you have people in your life that just aren't playing the role of father. And that means that you, in your role as son or daughter, right, have this terrible choice to make. You can't escape being a son or daughter. You can't shrug that off. You have to find some way of making peace with it. And that is effectively Orlando's challenge too, right? He has this brother figure who has let him down, and now he has a choice to make. He can either just escape forever into the forest and give up all society, or he can find some way of being the better man, right, within this broken, fallen world. The truth of what Jaques is saying can be found in all of our modern attempts to deconstruct or tear down all social roles, right? All the world's a stage, meaning that you are going to play some kind of role. Look at, remember Chaz Chop, the autonomous zone that they made in Seattle during the famous summer of 2020? It was this idea that we're going to break free. It was a kind of pastoral fantasy. We're going to break free of all these constraints. We're going to tear down oppressive American society. And famously, what happened? A warlord emerged. Why? Because that's what happens in societies with no rules, right? This guy, Raz Simone, basically rose up to play this role, right? He became the kind of strong man, which everybody knows happens because the wisdom of the ages teaches us that there are certain dynamics that are simply at play in human life. Look also at things like, this movement for ethical polygamy, that we're all going to live in polycules and date a bunch of different people. And, it always ends in some kind of betrayal or fear or disaster, right? Because, of course, we're designed for commitment and belonging and structure, right? And tearing apart the family just basically reasserts the old primal realities that the family was based on to begin with. You can't escape your roles. You have to live into them, right? You have to look at your own life and say, what are the ways that my role is being either corrupted or twisted, and what part of that is my fault, and what part of that is the fault of somebody else, and how can I navigate that in this broken world? There's no such thing as just shrugging off society altogether, and that's effectively what these characters have to go into the forest to learn. That's what makes this a beautiful play, and that's what makes Jaques' speech so brilliant and so endlessly fascinating and quotable. If you are hiring for any position, you need Indeed. They are the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. This is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. That's a pretty sweet deal. No reason not to do it. You don't pay them unless it really works. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all, and that is Indeed. They partner with you on every step of the hiring process. You'll find great talent. Over here at Soundfront, they actually use Indeed to hire the folks that make this podcast. They didn't use it for me, of course, or else they would have found a much better host. But they really are top notch. With Indeed Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes that match your job description right there on Indeed. You can start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit when you go to Indeed.com/heretics. And this is only valid through March 31st. So you got to get on it now. Indeed.com/heretics for a $75 sponsored job credit. Terms and conditions apply. Indeed.com/heretics. Need to hire, you need Indeed. Okay, so this is not just a work of philosophy. It's not just a work of pastoral. It's also a Shakespearean comedy, which means that we have to have a marriage, right? In fact, we're going to get 4. There's an enormous and enormously complicated set of plots. And again, when I said that nothing happens, I was kind of lying, except that these plots, are sort of inert. It doesn't really matter. And we know that they're going to get together in the end, but there's a lot of fun along the way. Duke Frederick sends Oliver into the forest. So Orlando is in the forest. Duke Frederick hears about this. He sends Oliver into the forest. Oliver is attacked by a lion. Apparently there's a lion in the forest, and Orlando saves him. So there's this moment, right, of kind of reversal that the younger brother becomes the caretaker. And this is, effectively a moment of grace. Meanwhile, at the same time, Orlando has been writing really bad poetry on the trees about his love for Rosalind, how much he loves this woman. Rosalind finds these poems as Ganymede, and of course can't reveal herself, but also is delighted to find that the one she loves her back. And so they enter into this funny game that kind of reminds us a little bit of Twelfth Night, which we talked about a while back, in which, the man dressed as a woman, dressed as a man, tries to get the man dressed as a man to woo her. And it's kind of a way of curing him, she says. She has this kind of realism as Ganymede. Men have died before and worms have eaten them, but not for love, is another famous line. And yet, what she's really doing is trying to kind of seduce him, or to live out her fantasy of being with him. So let's read just a couple of the exchanges between them. Rosalind, playing Ganymede, says, "Love is merely a madness, and I tell you deserves as well a dark house and a whip as madmen do. And the reason why they are not so punished and cured is that the lunacy is so ordinary, and that the whippers are in love too." By the way, I should mention once that this speech and some of the other speeches from the beginning that I read are in prose, which is always an indicator of comedy, right? Of ribaldry, of fun. And some of the more serious scenes that I read, like the one with Duke Frederick and Orlando and the banishment, those are in the classic iambic pentameter, which is 10 syllables per line with alternating stress. Da, 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 da. But now we're back into prose, so we know we're having fun. We're having fun when there's prose, right? That's a good rule. Are we having fun yet? Well, it's in prose. Yet I profess, Rosalind says, I profess curing it by counsel. Orlando, did you ever cure any so? Ganymede, yes, one, and in this manner. He was to imagine me his love, his mistress, and I set him every day to woo me, at which time would I, being but a moonish youth, grieve, be effeminate, changeable, longing and liking, proud, fantastical, apish, shallow, inconstant, full of tears, full of smiles. For every passion is something, and for no passion truly anything, as boys and women are, for the most part, cattle of this color, would now like him, now loathe him, then entertain him, then forswear him, now weep for him, then spit at him, that I drave my suitor from this mad humor of love to a living humor of madness, which was to forswear the full stream of the world, and to live in a nook, merely monastic. She's saying, I was so awful to this other suitor, I basically just drove him insane and sent him into hermitage, made him a hermit. This is funny, but it has a point also, which is, when we fall in love, we all, right, know the worst about ourselves. And so even if somebody loves us, we have a hard time sometimes believing that. I mean, maybe you've been in this position. I know I have, that when somebody says that they're in love with you, you're like, yeah, but you don't know all the terrible things about me. And I sort of wonder, in this story that Rosalind as Ganymede tells, whether she has some failed relationship in her past that she's thinking of, right? That she knows all the ways that women can be inconstant. She fears them in herself. And she's basically trying to get surety that Orlando's love will endure the worst of what she can be. It's very moving when you think about it, right? She's basically trying to put him through the ringer and see if his love is true, even when she's the broken mess that she is. We're all broken messes. And so even when, we meet the person that's right for us, we have this terrible sense of inadequacy sometimes that we have to battle with. And Rosalind here gets a chance to basically play out that inadequacy and exaggerate it to see what Orlando will do. So here's another interchange between them, just to give you flavor for what goes on, although it endures for quite a while. Orlando comes in, "Good day and happiness, dear Rosalind." So he's talking to the real Rosalind, but he doesn't know it. He thinks that it's Ganymede. And Jake, he says, "Nay then, God be with you, and you talk in blank verse." So this is a reference to what I just said about verse, right? "Good day and happiness, dear Rosalind," is in blank verse, that is to say in iambic pentameter with no rhyme. And Jake says, "God be with you," and you talk in blank verse, like, get out of here if you're going to talk in poetry. This is prose. Rosalind as Ganymede says, "Farewell, Monsieur Traveler. Look you lisp and wear strange suits. Disable all the benefits of your own country. Be out of love with your nativity and almost chide God for making you that countenance you are, or I will scarce think you have swam in a gondola." Jaques exits. Why? How now, Orlando? Where have you been all this while? You, a lover? And you serve me such another trick? Never come in my sight more. And, by the way, is sort of Elizabethan era English for if. If you serve me such another trick, never come in my sight more. Orlando, my fair Rosalind, I come within an hour of my promise. Rosalind, as Ganymede says, break an hour's promise in love? He that will divide a minute into 1,000 parts, and break but a part of 1,000 part of a minute, and in the affairs of love, it may be said of him that Cupid hath clapped him of the shoulder, but I'll warrant him heart whole. Orlando, pardon me, dear Rosalind. Rosalind, nay, an you be so tardy, come no more in my sight. I had as lief be wooed of a snail. So she's being just like Bridezilla. She's being the worst, and she's being like a caricature of the worst that she thinks of herself as capable of being. Ultimately, of course, since it's a comedy, she's not going to put him off, but they're at last going to get married, and this happens with a literal Deus ex machina. We have now 4 couples, one of which I have not yet mentioned, and that's Silvius and Phoebe, who two shepherds, who kind of a low plot in there's always kind of like a high plot and a low plot or a subplot. This is Silvius and Phoebe. Silvius loves Phoebe. Phoebe loves Ganymede, which is the imagined man that Rosalind is playing. Touchstone is in love with this woman, Audrey. Jaques has convinced them to wait until they can get a real priest to marry them. And Celia, interestingly, has fallen in love with Oliver. So they have this problem of the disguise, and they have this problem of Phoebe. How are they going to fix it? Well, Rosalind gets Phoebe to agree that she will marry Ganymede unless she chooses not to for some reason, and then Silvius will be her backup. And so Phoebe's like, no, I'm so in love with Ganymede, I'll never need that backup, but, sure, I'll marry Silvius if I decide not to marry Ganymede. Celia and Rosalind go away and then come back with the god Hymen, the god of marriage, and they have removed their male clothes. They reveal themselves as who they are. Turns out Rosalind's a woman. Therefore, Phoebe can't marry her because she's a girl, and Phoebe therefore has to marry Silvius. Touchstone and Audrey get together. Oliver and Celia get together. Oliver is sort of redeemed, and Rosalind gets Orlando. One last problem, right? They're still in the forest, right? And so then Shakespeare does another kind of, even Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, who famously loved Shakespeare so much, said that this was like a bit much, but there's kind of a last minute transformation. It turns out that Frederick has been bringing his armies into the woods to try and persecute everybody involved. But at the edge of the woods, he meets a hermit who converts him to the religious life. And so Duke Senior is restored and everybody gets to live happily ever after. So here's the end of it. There's, lots of singing and dancing. And suddenly there appears the middle brother of this family who says, basically the Duke has become religious. Jaques says, sir, by your patience, if I heard you rightly, the Duke hath put on a religious life and thrown into neglect the pompous court. Second brother, he hath. Jaques, to him will I. Out of these convertites there is much matter to be heard and learned. He says to the Duke, to you your former honor I bequeath, your patience and your virtue well deserves it. Orlando, you to a love that your true faith doth merit. To Oliver, you to your land and love and great allies. To Silvius, you to a long and well-deserved bed. To Touchstone, and you to wrangling, for thy long voyage is but for 2 months victualled. So to your pleasures. I am for other than for dancing measures. Duke Senior, stay, Jaques, stay. Jaques, to see no pastime I. What you would have, I'll stay to know at your abandoned cave. Duke Senior, proceed, we'll begin these rites, as we do trust they'll end in true delights. There's something very mysterious, actually, even though it is a bit of a sudden ending, a Deus Ex Machina, about this idea that actually Jaques is going to stay as this melancholy force in the forest with the newly hermited Duke Frederick, while the real court, Duke Senior, kind of takes what it has learned in the forest and reestablishes itself. We never escape society. We never escape human society. Our fantasies about escaping it tell us more about our discontents within society than about our real desire to shuck off every possible role and rule. And this is for you too, right? All the world's a stage and you are a player within it. You have a role to play. You are not just an autonomous being floating in the middle of nowhere. And thank God, because of course, not only are our roles sources of discontent and failure, they are also sources of joy and love, right? And this is essentially what is reestablished for all the funniness and the screwball comedy. This is essentially what is established in the play, that though we may chafe at civilization, though we may hate the roles we are placed in, at last, if we find a way to live healthily into our archetypes, the reward for this is joy and love. Hey, if you are suffering from stress or muscle and joint pain, I highly recommend Ned, which offers premium CBD products, full spectrum hemp oil extracted from USDA certified organic hemp plants. You can look at all their consumer and scientist reports. They're super transparent. This is something that people can get antsy about because they think it's weed. It's not weed. I actually use this as a topical when I get sore from weightlifting. Just basic stuff that you might be dealing with in your day-to-day life, trouble sleeping, stress, whatever. They have a bunch of premium CBD products, a full spectrum of active cannabinoids, which is a word that you can't say 20 times fast, but which is great for dealing with all these common problems. And if you want to try the new de-stress blend from Ned, we have a special offer just for folks that listen to Young Heretics. Every order over $40 qualifies for 15% off and a free de-stress blend sample. You go to helloned.com/heretics or enter heretics at checkout to take advantage. That's HELLONED.com/heretics to get 15% off plus a free de-stress blend sample. Thank you, Ned, for sponsoring our program and offering our listeners a natural remedy for some of life's most common health issues. One more time, it's helloned.com/heretics or enter heretics at checkout to get 15% off any order over $40 plus a free sample. Check it out. Mailbag questions come to me on Locals. Locals is a platform where I and the Young Heretics VIPs are building a community that nobody owns but us. We love the great works of the West. We all do. And I know you do too, because you're here listening to this show. And the VIPs get to go deeper into those works and to apply the realities, the truths of them to their lives. So we do live stream Q&As. I write articles that, that only VIPs can read. I'm translating the book of Romans on there right now and commenting on it. And of course, you get to be in the mailbag. So if you'd like to join, and I hope you will, go to youngheretics.com/locals and become a VIP. Here is a mailbag question from Elizabeth. Hey, Spencer. It seems like you are reading absolutely all the time. Yes, I'm very lucky in that way. Do you have any tricks to keep books, articles, ideas from bleeding into each other in your mind? I'm continually amazed at the breadth of content you can reference in one conversation. Well, thank you. Reading is life to me. It's a way of life, and therefore, it's I am somebody for whom it's not difficult to get up the energy to go and read. If you are somebody who maybe doesn't have a big reading life, or you feel like you want to integrate it into your life, the first thing that I would say is that quality and consistency are more important than quantity at first. You may get faster as you go, but setting aside even 30 minutes a day to read even 5 to 10 pages and to understand those pages and pay attention to them is more important than to just pile up as many books as possible. But it's very addictive. So you will find, especially I think if you buy real physical books, that eventually you will kind of get deeper into this stuff. And what you have to watch out for, I think, and I have to watch out for this too, is just wanting to finish as much as possible. That quality of attention, right? Putting things aside and reading what you are reading when you are reading it is the first tip that I would have for then recall and recollection and memory, right? The other thing to remember is that commonplace book that I mentioned, right? Some place where you can keep things like all jumbled together, where you see connections between like this Elizabethan play and this 2021 news article and this, ancient text by Plato. Finding some way to just keep notes of things. The note on my app that I have for this is just called Some Truth. And that's the idea, right? It's just a place where as you are reading, you are marking things down in your own hand with your own writing. Then I think you'll find that, those two things, paying attention to the quality rather than the quantity of your reading, counterintuitively, will actually lead you into more and better engagement. I don't read so much and remember so much because I am constantly trying to read as many pages as possible, but rather instead because I'm trying to make sure that I read at exactly the speed it takes for me to understand and to meditate upon and chew on things. And then I keep a note with all sorts of extra stuff. So keep a commonplace book and focus on consistency and getting in the habit and quality over quantity. Good luck with that. More to discuss about this on Locals. Please do join us at youngheretics.com/locals. Would love to see you there. That's it from me this week. If you like the work that we do here, if you like the show, you will love the Claremont Institute. We have 2 publications, the Claremont Review of Books and the American Mind, where we publish all sorts of great writing among conservatives about recovering the American idea, something that is more important than ever these days. You can go to claremont.org/donate to help support us in that work. And if you do, just mention in the notes that you heard about Claremont through Young Heretics. Thanks for being here. As always, it is my joy and pleasure to be with you. I will see you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.